Hello world, this is Craig. I've completed a first version of the schematic for the F8 3870 real-time clock. So let's go over those decisions that I made, the schematic. And I mentioned earlier that I wanted to keep this board in the 100 to 100 millimeter format. So that gets you the lowest fabrication rate for the boards. I decided to go with these intelligent DL2416 ASCII globe LED displays. This little piece of bug rug is about 100 millimeters on an edge, so it's handy to see how the displays can be across the top of the board, how much room some of the other components will take. The pins of these displays fit in that 100 millimeter board, but they are a little bit longer, so they're hanging over a millimeter or so on each end. But this will give the board the capacity to display 16 alphanumeric characters. And once I started to think about that full alphanumeric capability, it became a core feature, and I kind of designed around these displays. And if you don't like the look of these globe LED magnified displays, you can of course use the newer, there's a 2416 equivalent that is a matrix. It's like a 5x7 matrix. So if you don't like these, you can use the matrix version. It's just a drop-in replacement. There's a 9-pin serial and a barrel connector for power. I brought a header over here to bring off key signals, and this would be useful for debugging and let this board be more of a generic 3870 development tool, especially when it comes time to programming that 3870. So let's look at the schematic here. I'm using a standard crystal for the time-based input, and I have solder bridges to take these off to the header if somebody wants to play around with various inputs. I did notice that in the custom 3870, the customer had to specify which of the time bases they wanted to use, which seemed kind of strange. But on the piggyback version, it can use any of the available options of the time bases. And maybe the universal time base needed some of the unused masked ROM real estate. Be interesting if somebody knows the answer to that. Why the custom version you had to specify the time base, where the piggyback version you can use any of the time bases. As mentioned, I wanted to have a rotary switch and a push button input. So the low nibble of port 0 is the rotary switch to set the value of a digit, if we're using this to set a clock. And in video 85, I mentioned how ports 0 and 1 can wake up in any state, but this switch can only take the lines to ground. On the piggyback version, those ports are only going to be some version of open collector with that internal resistor. So everything will be fine no matter which side of the bed these pins happen to wake up on. The same for the push button down here on port 1, bit 0. It won't cause a problem with pin contention because all I can do is pull it low. I used a supervisory circuit as well as a standard RC on the reset input. And there's another push button to do a manual reset. After reading more about the reset input, the user manual describes that this can be ordered in the custom version without an internal pull-up resistor. So I presume that the piggyback version does have that pull-up on the reset. In the manual, they sort of implied it was a 6K pull-up. If there is a 6K internal, it'll charge up this capacitor much quicker than I'm expecting, so I may need to drop off this 75K and up this capacitor if we're not happy with the reset time. But I'm not too worried since I can populate that supervisory chip, and it'll provide a lot of forgiveness for many reset sins. I added a 555 to the external interrupt just in case I ever wanted to play with that, some of the hardware interrupt features, and it's always nice to have an external tick. I picked out a real-time clock with a serial interface. It's just one more thing to bit bang. This is a DS1302. I chickened out and I dropped in a protection resistor here on the I/O line to protect against contention. I don't think it's going to be necessary, but it's easier to put in a 0 ohm there than it is to cut a trace and jam something in there. Over here, I have an LED attached to a pin on port 5, and the speaker is down here as the high bit on port 7. I'm running the speaker through a gate here just to offer a little protection to the 3870. I can buy 7400 gates for pennies per, but not so much with the F8. I decided to just use a Max 232 for the serial port, even if it didn't come out for a decade after the 3870. This is one thing here worth mentioning. To protect the 3870, I did put in a signal diode on the read signal from the Max 232. So down here on pin 9, where it's reading that pin from the Max 232, I put a signal diode down there to help protect that pin on the processor from contention. And I did that because I figured at some point I'm going to mess up the port output, write a logic 1 to that pin, which will take that pin to ground because it's inverted. And meanwhile, if that Max 232 is trying to drive the pin high, it could have a poor outcome. I could have added a resistor here to just dissipate the difference, but remember there's a 6K inside the 3870 trying to pull that line high. So if the max 232 were pulling it low, the best I could get on the input would be whatever voltage results from that voltage divider, that 6K high and that max pulling it low. So I think there could be a problem getting the definitive logic state into that input. So I decided to use a little signal diode. It's a 1N270 germanium. It should have a low enough drop that even if the max 232 is on the higher end of its specs, on a logic low, it should be able to pull that pin down sufficiently to get a clean threshold on the 3870. After we get this going and we take some measurements, we can see if there's a better solution, but I think this should work fine. If I have room, I'd like to put a little pad per hole sandbox on the board, so I put this over here as a reminder to drop in a pad per hole when I'm laying the board out. I've got 4 displays hanging on port 4 and the active low right connected to the port output strobe. And just in case something goes wrong with directly using the strobe line, I also put in a jumper so I can latch the data into the displays using another output pin and explicitly cycling that to latch into the displays. That line normally just runs an LED, so the user won't even notice if we do need to use that to latch in the displays. Timing and logic-wise, there shouldn't be a problem, but it's better safe than sorry on this prototype board. I have the address and the chip enables coming off the low 4 bits of port 5. The address lines are connected to the 4 displays, the chip enables are inverted, and then a combination of the 4 enables are used to decode which display is being addressed. So the low nibble of port 5 will just be the digit address, 0 for the far right and F for the far left. I'll get to why I use the exclusive OR for those inverters in just a bit. And the last thing to talk about on this is the this business here with the 7497 and the second 555. I wanted to try out something for dimming the displays. Some spec sheets for the DL2416 say it can be done. Others say the results are disappointing, and others say it's just not advisable at all. But I thought I would try something out here. I don't have high hopes for this. It's worth a stab, and if it works, in a later version I'll add a light sensor. And if it doesn't work, then I'll just put something else in its place. And that blanking circuit is why I use the exclusive OR for the inverters, because with this duty cycle scheme I'm using on the 7497, the output needs to be inverted at the midpoint. So the 7497 creates a duty cycle, not a true PWM, just a 0 to 100% duty cycle based on these inputs. So even though I've used this before for dimming LEDs and crude DACs and the like, it may not work with these displays since we know almost nothing about their internals and the spec sheets just aren't clear with what frequencies that blanking display can take and so forth. So it may or may not work. Alrighty, so this is how the board is going off to the board house for fabrication. I've already started laying out the board, so I should be able to send it off with my next order. It'll at least let us fire up my first 3870 and start playing with the assembly language. There's a lot that I need to learn in the software for this. I already have the assembler set up and I've started playing around, but really looking forward to having the hardware platform to run the code on. I'm pretty sure I have all the parts to build this, so it should be a quick to pick it up and get it going when the boards come back. But while we're talking about parts, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention and get an idea as to the BOM cost on this. I wanted to get more of these displays for a couple of boards that I'm going to send to somebody else, and I thought I found a good deal on eBay. There were something like 5 displays for $25, so $5 a display, pretty good deal. But they arrived on this insulating packing foam. So they were obviously mishandled, and I haven't tested them all, but so far, some of them have been just dead on arrival. And I'm perpetually disappointed with people selling electronics on eBay that have no idea what they're doing. So if you have a seller that you trust with electronics, go ahead and pay the $6, $7, or $8 or whatever the going rate is for these, if you can trust them to actually send something out on conductive foam. As for the CPU, I've designed around the 38P70, so if you can find some of those, I bought a couple of them recently for the boards, and I think I paid $33 a piece plus shipping. So all totaled, for the pricey components on this, it looks like it's going to be about a $75 project, by the time you take shipping into account, depending on where you have to get some of these things. But if anybody has a surplus of these displays or these 38P70s, let me know. As always, this channel is entirely supported by likes and subscribers, sharing, engaging comments, and so forth. I will talk with you later. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.